Detective Marcus Reed hunched his shoulders against the biting cold as he stepped out of his car and into the dimly lit alleyway. The streetlights above cast long, eerie shadows on the wet pavement, their flickering bulbs barely cutting through the thick fog that clung to the city like a shroud. He pulled his coat tighter around him, the collar brushing against the stubble on his chin, as he made his way toward the cluster of uniformed officers standing at the end of the alley. "Another one, Detective," Officer Jenkins said, his voice heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Reed nodded in acknowledgement, already bracing himself for the sight he knew awaited him. 3 murders in as many weeks, each more brutal than the last, and the city was on edge. But it wasn't just the killings themselves that gnawed at him. It was the pattern, or rather, the lack thereof. Reed's footsteps echoed against the cold bricks as he approached the body. The victim, a young man in his early 20s, lay crumpled against the wall, his life drained away through a deep gash across his throat. Blood had pooled around him, dark and thick, congealing in the chill of the night. The victim's eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of terror that seemed to pierce right through Reed. No sign of struggle, Reed noted, crouching down beside the body. The precision of the cut suggested a skilled hand, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The alley was empty, save for the police and the victim, a dead end, quite literally. No witnesses, no cameras, nothing but the darkened windows of old tenements watching over the scene like silent spectators. Nothing, except for the cat. Reed's gaze shifted to the small black cat sitting mere feet away from the body, its sleek fur blending almost seamlessly with the shadows. The cat stared at him, its green eyes reflecting the sparse light with an unsettling intensity. It didn't seem afraid, didn't bolt or hiss as cats often do when they're frightened. It just watched. "What's with the cat?" Reed asked, straightening up but keeping his eyes locked on the animal. "No idea," Officer Jenkins replied, scratching his head. "It was here when we arrived. Doesn't belong to the victim, and no one around here claims to have seen it before." Reed frowned, his mind working through the oddity of it. This wasn't the first time this cat had been seen at a crime scene. The previous 2 murders, eerily similar in their execution, had also been marked by the presence of a black cat. No one had thought much of it at first, a stray, perhaps drawn to the scene by curiosity or hunger. But now Reed wasn't so sure. "Get the team in here," Reed instructed. "I want every inch of this place combed over." He moved away from the body, pulling on a pair of gloves as the forensic team began their work. As he surveyed the alley, his eyes kept drifting back to the cat, which hadn't moved an inch. It sat there, unmoving, its gaze never leaving him. Reed couldn't shake the feeling that it was studying him, measuring him in some way that was beyond human understanding. 3rd murder, same lack of evidence. Detective Lisa Vasquez's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She approached, her breath puffing out in little clouds in the cold air. "And that damn cat again. What do you make of it?" Reed shook his head, unsure of what to say. "I don't know, but it's too much of a coincidence to ignore. 3 different crime scenes, 3 different parts of the city, but the same cat. It doesn't add up." "Maybe it's just a stray," Vasquez offered, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or maybe someone's using it as a calling card." Reed's frown deepened. "Maybe. But then why leave no other trace? No prints, no DNA, no witnesses. It's like the killer wants to taunt us, but with what? A cat." He didn't like it. There was something deeply unsettling about the whole thing, something that made his instincts scream that this case was far from ordinary. Reed had been a detective for years, had seen more than his fair share of gruesome crime scenes, but nothing like this. The sheer lack of evidence, the methodical precision of the killings, and now this bizarre feline presence. It all felt wrong. The cat finally moved, rising slowly to its feet. It took a few steps toward the body, then turned its head to look at Reed one last time before it slinked away into the shadows, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. "Follow it," Reed barked, but it was too late. The cat had already melted into the night, leaving nothing but questions in its wake. Vasquez touched his arm, grounding him back to the grim reality at their feet. "We'll find it, Marcus. Whatever's going on here, we'll figure it out." Reed nodded, though his thoughts were far from settled. He couldn't shake the feeling that the cat knew something they didn't, something crucial to solving this case. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, mingling with the blood on the pavement, Reed knew this was only the beginning of a long, dark journey. The killer was out there, somewhere in the city, and Reed had the unsettling suspicion that the cat would lead him to them, one way or another. The black cat sat on the windowsill, its green eyes fixed on something outside, something Detective Marcus Reed couldn't see. It was the third night since he had brought the cat home, and his unease had only grown. He had hoped to discover some clue, some insight by keeping the cat close, but instead he found himself trapped in a cycle of sleepless nights and a growing sense of dread. The cat's arrival at his apartment had been simple enough. After the third crime scene, with no leads and no witnesses except for this enigmatic feline, Reed had impulsively decided to take it in. Maybe, he had reasoned, the cat was the key to unlocking this mystery. Maybe in the quiet of his home, it would reveal something, a behavior, a reaction that could steer the investigation in the right direction. But now, as he watched the cat stare into the darkness beyond his window, he wasn't so sure. Reed leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples in an attempt to ward off the headache that had been building all day. His apartment, usually a sanctuary from the horrors he encountered on the job, felt different now. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive, and there was a constant prickling at the back of his neck, as if he were being watched. The cat turned its head slowly, those eerie green eyes locking onto Reed's. For a moment, he swore there was an intelligence in that gaze, something almost human in its intensity. Then, just as quickly, it looked away, curling into a ball on the windowsill, as if nothing had happened. Reed sighed and stood up, walking over to the window to peer out into the night. The city below was quiet, only the distant hum of traffic breaking the stillness. He told himself it was just his imagination, that the stress of the case was getting to him. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The nightmares had started the night he brought the cat home, vivid and terrifying, in a way that left him shaken even after he awoke. In the dreams, he was no longer himself. He was someone else, someone dark and twisted, moving through the shadows with lethal intent. He could feel the rush of adrenaline, the cold satisfaction as he watched the life drain from his victims. But the worst part wasn't the killing itself. It was the way he enjoyed it. The dreams were so real, so visceral, that he would wake up drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest, struggling to shake off the feeling that he had actually committed those murders. He hadn't told anyone about the nightmares. How could he? They were too disturbing, too close to the darkness he had sworn to fight against. And yet, they felt like a warning, a message from some deep, primal part of his brain that he couldn't ignore. The cat stretched lazily, hopping down from the windowsill to wind its way around Reed's legs. Its fur brushed against his pants, soft and warm, but the contact sent a shiver down his spine. He bent down, tentatively reaching out to scratch behind its ears. The cat purred, a low, rumbling sound that somehow made the silence of the apartment even more oppressive. "What are you trying to tell me?" Reed murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The cat stared up at him, its green eyes unreadable. Reed felt a surge of frustration. He was a detective, trained to read people, to see through lies and uncover hidden truths. But this cat, this silent witness to unspeakable crimes, was a mystery he couldn't crack. And the more he tried, the deeper he sank into the darkness surrounding the case. The nightmares worsened as the days passed, each one more intense than the last. Reed found himself dreading sleep, staying up late into the night, poring over case files, trying to find a connection he might have missed. But the files offered no answers, only the same cold facts he already knew. 3 victims, no apparent connection, and no evidence left behind, except for the cat. It was during one of these late nights, as he sat hunched over his desk with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, that he first heard the footsteps. They were soft, almost imperceptible, but in the stillness of his apartment, they might as well have been thunder. Reed froze, his hand tightening around his pen. He strained his ears, but the sound had already stopped. He stood slowly, his eyes scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. The cat was sitting on the floor, staring intently at the far corner of the living room. "Who's there?" Reed called out, his voice rough with fatigue. There was no answer, only the silence pressing down on him like a weight. He took a step forward, his pulse quickening. The cat's gaze never wavered from the corner, its body tensed as if ready to pounce. Reed's hand moved to the gun holstered at his side, fingers brushing against the cool metal. He had never felt the need to draw his weapon in his own home, but tonight, with the air thick with unseen tension, he was tempted. The footsteps came again, louder this time, moving across the room toward him. Reed's breath caught in his throat as he swung around, expecting to see someone, something, lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing there, just the faint outline of furniture in the dark and the relentless pounding of his heart. The cat let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the air like a warning. Reed's grip on his gun tightened, his senses on high alert. But the room remained empty, the shadows unbroken. Finally, the cat relaxed, the growl fading into silence as it turned its gaze back to Reed, as if to say, "It's gone now." Reed released a shaky breath, lowering his gun. He felt like a fool, jumping at shadows in his own home. But the fear was real, a cold, gnawing thing that wouldn't let go. He walked over to the corner where the cat had been staring and found nothing out of the ordinary, no sign of intruders, no evidence of anything out of place. He returned to his desk, his hands trembling as he picked up the cup of coffee. It was lukewarm now, the bitterness coating his tongue as he took a sip. The cat had curled up in its usual spot on the windowsill, eyes half closed as if nothing had happened. But Reed knew better. Something was wrong, something he couldn't explain. And the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling became that he was being drawn into a trap. The next morning, Reed awoke to find the cat sitting on his chest, staring down at him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. It was as if the cat was trying to communicate something important. But Reed couldn't decipher the message, couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The nightmares, the footsteps, the cat's strange behavior, it all pointed to one thing. There was something he was missing, some vital clue that was just out of reach. As the days turned into nights and the nights into an endless loop of terror, Reed realized he was no longer in control. The case, the cat, the unseen forces at work, they were all closing in on him, pushing him closer to an edge he wasn't sure he could pull back from. And as he sat in the dark, the cat's green eyes watching him from the shadows, Reed couldn't help but wonder if he was already too far gone. The silent witness had seen everything, but what it had witnessed and what it was trying to reveal was still a mystery that threatened to consume him whole. Detective Marcus Reed sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of old case files and newspaper clippings, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting a pool of light in the otherwise dark room. The rain outside beat a steady rhythm against the windows, a constant reminder of the storm brewing inside his mind. The black cat lay curled up on the corner of the desk, its green eyes watching Reed with a calm intensity, as if silently urging him forward. It had been a week since Reed began digging into the cold cases, a desperate attempt to find some link between the current murders and anything that might have happened in the past. The nightmares still haunted his nights, but now they came with a disturbing clarity. He could see the faces of the victims, hear their final gasps for breath, feel the rush of adrenaline as if he were the one wielding the knife. It was as if he were being pulled deeper into the mind of a killer with each passing day. Reed knew that to solve the present, he had to understand the past. And so he had spent countless hours sifting through files, looking for anything, any thread that might tie the recent murders to something long forgotten. But so far, nothing had stood out. It was as if the killer had appeared out of nowhere, leaving no traceable history, no prior pattern. The victims, too, seemed unrelated at first glance. Different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of the city. And yet, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were all connected by something just out of reach. The cat, as always, was a silent companion in his search. It would often sit beside him, watching as he worked, occasionally stretching out a paw to bat at a loose sheet of paper. Reed had grown used to its presence, even though it never ceased to unsettle him. There was something almost human in the way it observed him, a patience that suggested it knew more than it was letting on. Then, late one night, Reed stumbled upon it, a name in an old police report that sent a chill down his spine. Eleanor Grimshaw. The report detailed the brutal murder of a woman in her late 30s, found dead in her home nearly 20 years ago. Her throat had been slit, her body discovered by a neighbor who had heard strange noises in the night. The case had gone cold quickly, with no leads, no suspects, and no motive. Just another unsolved mystery in a city full of them. But it wasn't the brutality of the murder that caught Reed's attention. It was the mention of a cat. According to the report, Eleanor had owned a black cat, one that had mysteriously disappeared the night of the murder. The police had noted the cat's absence, but it was considered a minor detail, irrelevant to the investigation. No one had thought to connect it to anything until now. Reed's heart pounded as he pulled up the crime scene photos from Eleanor Grimshaw's case. There was the same eerie stillness, the same meticulous lack of evidence. The only difference was the absence of the cat. He scanned the photos, looking for anything that might have been missed, and then he saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow in the corner of one image, shaped like a cat, but distorted, as if it were caught mid-movement. He leaned back in his chair, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. The black cat that had been appearing at the recent crime scenes. It wasn't just any cat. It was Eleanor Grimshaw's cat, or at least it was tied to her in some way he couldn't yet understand. But how and why? Reed's mind raced as he connected the dots. The victims in the current case, each one of them had some connection to Eleanor. A former lover, a business rival, a neighbor who had once been accused of harassing her. All of them had crossed her path in some way, and now they were all dead, with the same black cat appearing at each crime scene. But Eleanor Grimshaw had been dead for 20 years. How could she possibly be connected to these murders? And how did the cat fit into all of this? Reed felt a growing sense of unease as he considered the possibilities. The cat wasn't just a witness. It was something more. Something that had survived or returned from beyond death to exact revenge. He sifted through the rest of the files, searching for any mention of Eleanor in connection to the victims. But it was all circumstantial, all based on old grievances and forgotten feuds. There was no clear motive, no obvious connection that could be easily proven. It was as if the killings were part of some twisted vendetta that had festered over the years, only now coming to a head. The cat let out a low purr, breaking the silence in the room. Reed glanced over at it, his mind swirling with questions. "What are you?" he muttered, half expecting the cat to respond. But it simply blinked slowly at him, its green eyes reflecting the light from the lamp. Reed knew he had to dig deeper, to uncover more about Eleanor Grimshaw and her life before her death. He pulled up old newspaper articles, interviews with neighbors, anything that might give him more context. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Eleanor had been a woman plagued by misfortune. She had lost her family in a car accident when she was young, had a string of failed relationships, and had become increasingly isolated in her later years. The only constant in her life had been her cat, which she was said to have treated with an almost obsessive affection. As Reed read through the accounts, a pattern began to form. Eleanor had been wronged again and again by those around her. And each of her killers, in some way, had been connected to the people who had hurt her the most. It was as if the murders were a form of retribution, a settling of old scores that had been long overdue. But that still didn't explain the cat. How had it survived all these years, and why was it leading Reed down this path? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the cat wasn't just a passive observer. It was guiding him, pushing him toward the truth, even as it remained silent. Reed's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crash from the other room. He jumped to his feet, his heart racing as he reached for his gun. The cat bolted from the desk, darting into the hallway with a speed that belied its usual calm demeanor. Reed followed, his senses on high alert. The sound had come from the living room. He moved cautiously, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. As he rounded the corner, he saw the source of the noise. A picture frame had fallen from the wall, the glass shattered on the floor. The picture it held was one he had taken of his parents years ago when he was still a child. It had been hanging there for years, untouched. The cat was sitting in the middle of the living room, its back to Reed, staring at something he couldn't see. Reed's eyes scanned the room, but nothing seemed out of place. No sign of an intruder, no sign of anything out of the ordinary, except for the cat's unrelenting focus on a spot near the broken frame. Reed knelt down beside the cat, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He reached out, but before he could touch it, The cat hissed, a sharp, angry sound that sent a jolt of fear through him. He froze, his hand hovering in the air as the cat's fur bristled and it backed away, its eyes still fixed on that one spot. And then Reed saw it, a small, dark stain on the floor, almost invisible against the wood grain. He leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized what it was. Blood. Old, dried, but unmistakable. He felt the room spin around him as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about Eleanor Grimshaw's past. It was about his own. The realization hit him like a wave, washing over him with a force that left him breathless. This cat, this silent witness to the past and the present, had brought him here for a reason. It had led him to this moment, to this discovery. But why? And what did it mean? Reed stood up, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. He had to find out more about Eleanor, about the cat, and about the connection to his own life that he had never seen coming. The past was unraveling before him, and with it, the answers he had been searching for. But as he looked down at the cat, now calm and composed once more, he knew that the worst was yet to come. The past wasn't done with him yet. And whatever lay ahead, Reed had the sinking feeling that it would demand a price he wasn't prepared to pay. The house at the end of the long, desolate road loomed before Detective Marcus Reed like a specter from another time, its crumbling facade shrouded in darkness. The storm had worsened, turning the road into a slick, treacherous path. But Reed pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the place, the final piece of the puzzle, the last stop on a journey that had dragged him through nightmares and shadows. He parked the car and stepped out, the cold rain instantly soaking through his clothes. The black cat had been eerily silent during the drive, curled up in the passenger seat, as if conserving its energy for what was to come. Now it sat poised on the car's hood, its green eyes glowing in the gloom as it watched Reed approach the house. The building had been abandoned for years, yet as Reed climbed the creaking steps to the front door, he felt a presence, something old, something waiting. His hand hovered over the doorknob, a moment of hesitation clawing at him. He had no idea what he would find inside, but he knew it would change everything. The nightmares, the murders, the cat, it all led back here to the place where Eleanor Grimshaw had lived and died. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Reed's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing dust-covered furniture, peeling wallpaper, and the lingering smell of decay. The house was a tomb, untouched by time, a place where the past still hung heavy in the air. The cat darted inside, disappearing into the shadows, and Reed followed, his senses heightened by the oppressive silence. He moved through the house, the beam of his flashlight dancing over old photographs, forgotten trinkets, and the remnants of a life long gone. The cat's soft footsteps echoed ahead of him, leading him deeper into the house, toward a destination Reed instinctively knew was inevitable. Finally, they reached a door at the end of a narrow hallway. The wood was old and warped, the paint chipped and faded. Reed's hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob, the memories of his nightmares rushing back in a flood of images, blood, screams, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. The cat sat at his feet, its eyes locked on the door, as if urging him to open it. With a deep breath, Reed pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface tarnished with age. But it wasn't the mirror that drew Reed's attention. It was the reflection. He saw himself, but not as he was now. The reflection showed him as he had been in his nightmares, dressed in dark clothes, his face twisted into a mask of cold determination. In his hand was a knife, dripping with blood. The same knife he had seen in his dreams, the one he had used to kill. Reed staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be another nightmare, another trick of the mind. But the reflection didn't change. It remained, a silent accusation that chilled him to his core. The cat leapt onto the dresser beside the mirror, its green eyes reflecting the light in an unnatural glow. Reed stared at it, his mind racing. This wasn't possible. He wasn't a killer. He had been chasing a murderer, not becoming one. But as he looked around the room, the truth began to unravel in his mind, unraveling like the delicate threads of a spider's web. The house wasn't just a place of death. It was a place of memory, a place where the boundaries between the past and present, between the living and the dead, had collapsed. The reflection began to change, shifting to show other faces, faces Reed recognized. The victims. They stared back at him from the mirror, their eyes filled with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. And standing among them, just behind his own reflection, was Eleanor Grimshaw. Her image was ghostly, translucent, but her expression was one of sorrow and rage. She raised a hand, pointing directly at Reed, and in that moment, he understood. The cat, Eleanor's spirit, had brought him here, not to uncover the identity of a killer, but to face the truth of his own actions. Eleanor hadn't been seeking vengeance against her killers. She had been seeking justice for her own murder. And Reed, in his obsession to solve the case, had been drawn into the same darkness that had consumed those before him. He had become what he had been chasing. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. The cat jumped down from the dresser and walked to the center of the room, sitting beneath the mirror, its eyes never leaving Reed. It was waiting for him to acknowledge the truth. Reed fell to his knees, the weight of the revelation crushing him. His memories were fragments, distorted by the nightmares, but now they began to coalesce into something more concrete. The late nights, the growing paranoia, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just the cat. It was his own conscience gnawing at him from within. He had killed them. He had been driven to it by forces he couldn't comprehend, manipulated by the spirit of Eleanor Grimshaw, who had sought to use him to complete her twisted sense of justice. And now, with her killers dead, there was only one task left. The cat approached him, brushing its body against his knee, before sitting directly in front of him. It stared into his eyes, and Reed felt the final pieces of his fractured mind falling into place. The cat was done with its mission, and so was he. He knew what he had to do. Reed stood slowly, his legs trembling beneath him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his service weapon, the cold metal almost slipping from his sweaty grip. He looked into the mirror one last time, at the faces of the dead, at his own reflection, and then at Eleanor's ghostly image, still watching him with those hollow eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. The cat's purr filled the room, a low rumbling sound that seemed to resonate in Reed's chest. He raised the gun to his temple, closing his eyes as a single tear slid down his cheek. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the empty house, followed by a heavy silence. The black cat sat in the center of the room, its green eyes reflecting the light from the flickering bulb. It watched as Reed's body crumpled to the floor, the gun slipping from his lifeless hand. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the finality of what had just occurred. Then slowly, the cat turned and walked out of the room, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. The house was silent once more, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the windows. In the mirror, the image of Eleanor Grimshaw faded away, leaving only the empty room reflected back. The curse was broken, the past finally laid to rest. But as the storm raged outside, the black cat slinked out of the house and into the night, its mission complete, yet its journey far from over.